it's very whimsical.
There was amazing scenery.
Couldn't really follow necessarily the storyline as something fluid.
I believed everything they were doing, and at some points I thought these people are actually there.
Hi, welcome again to Fade to Black. This week, Dalia and I are flying as a dynamic duo of movie reviewers. And her and I looked at a couple of movies. Why don't you start us off?
Well, this week at Cinema Politica on Wednesday, 30th of March, will be two Norwegian short documentary films about landmines. The first one is Cloud 9, which is a brief look about a team of cluster mine clearance who worked in Guinea-Bissau to take out the thousands of cluster bombs that have left behind since the Civil War. The second one is a much more interesting introspective look at landmines in Cambodia, and it follows the life of a woman named An Vi whose husband died while cultivating the land and left behind 8 children. So An Vi and her 8 daughters scavenge and cultivate the land every day in order to sustain themselves and find food. I found the second one a lot more poignant and a lot more emotionally intense.
Yeah. It was definitely, the second one definitely had more personality to it. I guess that would be the best word to describe it. For one thing, it is narrated by the filmmaker. So the way I would describe it is that Cloud 9 is more objective, whereas Life in the Minefield is more subjective. You're seeing it through the lens of someone's experiences. The other interesting thing is that Cloud 9 sort of looks more at the bigger picture of things, how these mines and unexploded ordnance, how they got there, what the larger political situation, like how it's being reacted to, what steps are being taken to solve this crisis, whereas Life Among the Minefields looks more about how it's affecting people on a personal scale.
Every year in Cambodia, 50,000 people are either killed or injured by landmines. The tragedy of this very introspective look is that watching the interactions between An Vi and her children, you see that her life is actually very rich.
Oh yeah.
They're at the bottom of the food chain. They live on rice every day, but they're happy. And if it wasn't for that one element, they'd be fine. They'd be like totally content, and they'd probably be doing much better in terms of feeding themselves. And that was such an interesting thing, is that she keeps a really upbeat spirit in the face of these horrible circumstances. She was very, very positive. It was a little eerie sometimes how positive she was. Smiling in the face of death. Always smiling, that woman. And very tough woman. Taking her children out with her, knowing that potentially they could step on a mine while gathering food. And you feel that tension too. The movie is so unbelievably tense at times, especially in the last 10 minutes or so, because you keep thinking that something horrible is going to happen, and that the movie is going to end on this tragic note, like something, they stepped on a mine, somebody got hurt, and you're just on the edge of your seat because you're praying that it isn't going to turn out that way. There's one bit where someone's just walking along and they trip, and I just went I had the same reaction.
Yeah, it was terrifying.
I was jumpy. Unlike Cloud 9 though, what I appreciate about it was that it was not a forced happy ending. They did not try to end it on a light note. I found that more sincere and true to the subject matter.
Yeah, exactly. I think they do make a good sort of double bill though, because Cloud 9 is more clinical almost. It's not as well put together as Life Among the Minefield. It actually kind of stalls at times. There's little glitches with the footage, and sometimes the audio will cut out for no real reason. But it gives you all the information that you need to feel like you have a handle on the situation, like you know what's going on, how this came about, what what steps are being taken, that sort of thing. And then you watch Life in the Minefield afterwards, and you sort of zoom
The
in.
microcosm.
Yeah, exactly.
The very vital, essential microcosm. Overall, I recommend this viewing. It's important to know about the manufacturing, production, and usage of cluster bombs and landmining devices, which is a phenomena that has a very long, long road ahead of it before going away.
Yeah.
So I recommend this film.
I do as well. It is very difficult to watch, especially Life in the Minefield, because there is a sort of subplot with the young man who loses his foot after stepping on a mine, and they don't hold back. You see everything that's going on. It's
We witnessed the actual incident. We see
the
his
aftermath,
leg.
the aftermath at least, and we see, and it's very, very difficult to watch for the squeamish.
I was very squeamish all throughout this film.
I was wincing at times, and it's very hard to get me to do that.
Yeah.
But overall, I would recommend it. It is a very interesting and important film to watch, and definitely worth a look. So on that note, we're going to take a quick break and be back in a little bit with our next review. All right, next up we are going to be looking at Ponette. It's actually not a newer film. It was made in 1996 by Jacques Doillon. You actually felt more strongly about this one than I did, I think. I was sort of not quite neutral. You didn't like it, I think.
It's the first film that forced me to contemplate leaving the theater.
Wow, ever?
The first film.
Wow.
It was
impressive.
tedious. It was not engaging. I didn't feel any sympathy towards the main character, a young girl by the name of Ponette. She's 4 years old at the time when her mother dies in a car accident.
Yeah.
And her distraught father and all the other adults in her life are attempting to console her.
To try and further her understanding of this.
Right. But then the film goes on to a 2-hour length span of claustrophobic close-ups of the young girl's face as she's kind of wimping and sniffing her nose and pouting. And it's trying to delve into the psychology of child trauma. But I feel that it fails despite the excellent performance.
Oh yeah, the young
by
girl.
Victoire Trival.
She's very good. And it does have kind of a religious subplot as well, because you have different people telling her, what they think happens in the afterlife. Her dad would appear to be an atheist, so he's just like, no, it's nothing. And other people are like, oh, she goes up and she's with Jesus forever, and other people will say something else. And it's an interesting angle, I'll give it that. But it felt sort of sloppily handled, it felt very childlike in its, in the way it was trying to get across. It's funny, Kevin Smith's Dogma was a more insightful religious film, and that movie had a big rubber poop monster, It just felt so sort of ham-fisted.
I agree, the angle was interesting, however, it was superficial.
Yeah, exactly.
The way it was presented was very superficial. Heavy concepts of death and how a child perceives death should be delicately treated. However, they were just taken on patronizingly. The editing was very, very patronizing. It was slow. It was no story. There was no plot.
Yeah, I didn't feel like there was enough character growth going on. And the thing that really bugged me is it felt like it was trying really hard to pluck at my heartstrings. And that's the worst thing. See, my heart is like a fortress, a doom fortress, with a big skull on the front. And you can't storm that thing head on. You gotta sneak in. You gotta be like a ninja and get in there, and then you'll find my heartstrings, and then you'll get me teared up. But if you just assault me with images of a crying little girl and all this melodrama, I'll just shut down.
Child actors are problematic in that it's very difficult for them to really perceive subtlety and subtle emotion.
Yeah.
So ironically, that subconscious that they're trying to raise out of the child does not happen with us as viewers. So we don't relate to the child, and we don't relate to the film. And I totally agree with you with the religious subcontext. I found Christian iconography all across the board.
And in an unsubtle way, and really
very preachy. Every
really
time
preachy.
she tries to reach out to an adult to give her some sense of guidance, they just give this one-line sentence of, your mama's up in heaven with Jesus. And that's the end of that.
Like, can you get more deep into it? Because this potentially, that plot could make for a really interesting movie about religion and how confusing it can be for young adults, or just young people rather.
I felt that the delusion that the adults wrap themselves in terms of religious framework as a way of dealing with a sincere trauma was delusional for the child. You don't treat trauma with delusions. It's like not the best way to go. I found that interesting because after the film screening at Cinema du Parc, they brought in a psychologist who talked about how important this film was in treating child psychology. So I was very surprised by that. I didn't find it effective at all.
And I felt that the score really didn't help make it any less melodramatic, because it's just cello, 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 cello. All the time.
Too much back.
Yeah, I know, exactly. And it felt sort of cheesy and melodramatic, and I was just like, oh, I get it. It's a French film. You love the cello. You love the cello. But it was just like, seriously, you're playing it a little too strong here. That was my impression through the whole thing. Is just, you're coming on too strong. Got to be subtle.
Well, I'm amazed I survived this film, and if you're into I don't know, rural France, children, Christian iconography.
Got a lot of pastoral imagery. Very pretty.
Enjoy it if you can. At Cinema du Parc, it's screening all week.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I hated it, but I wouldn't really recommend it. It did not capture me.
Neither did it.
Yep. All right, so it looks like that brings a close to our twofer of reviews for you today. Be sure to tune in next week for more of us talking about the movies.